What is the true value of a simple act of kindness? For Ariana Hayes, a 23-year-old waitress drowning in debt and family medical bills, it was a question she never thought to ask. She worked at the Gilded Spoon, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants, a place where compassion was a currency rarely spent. But when a destitute old man walked through those doors shivering and ignored by everyone, she made a choice. It was a choice that would cost her everything she had. Right before it led her to a truth so staggering, it would change the course of her life forever. What if the person you helped, the one everyone else threw away, was secretly the most powerful person in the room? Ariana Hayes felt the ache in her bones before she even felt the chill of the late October air. It was a deep, settled weariness that had become her constant companion. At 23, she navigated a life that felt a decade older. By day, she was a student at the Parsons School of Design, her sketchbook filled with vibrant dreams of architecture and light. By night, she wore the starched black and white uniform of a waitress at the Gilded Spoon, a place where dreams were either consumed on gold-rimmed plates or crushed under the heel of a patent leather shoe. The Gilded Spoon wasn't just a restaurant, it was a theater of wealth on Park Avenue. Marble floors gleamed under chandeliers that dripped crystal light, reflecting the polished smiles of the city's elite. The air, thick with the scent of truffle oil and quiet ambition, was a world away from the cramped Brooklyn apartment she shared with her mother and her younger brother Leo. Leo was the anchor of her life and the source of its storm. His cystic fibrosis was a relentless thief, stealing his breath, his energy, and every dollar Ariana and her mother could scrape together. The latest experimental treatment, a slim, desperate hope offered by a specialist at Mount Sinai, came with a price tag that looked more like a zip code. So Ariana worked. She picked up extra shifts, sacrificed sleep for study, and poured her fading energy into serving people for whom $1,000 dinner was a casual Tuesday. Her manager, Mr. Richard Davies, was a man carved from ice. His obsession was perfection, or rather the appearance of it. A fork placed a millimeter out of alignment, a water glass less than 3/4 full, a smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. These were cardinal sins in his book. He patrolled the dining room like a shark, his eyes scanning for any imperfection that might tarnish the restaurant's 3 Michelin star reputation. Hayes. His voice cut through the low hum of conversation. Table 7. The Vanderbilts. Don't just stand there daydreaming. Their Pellegrino should have been opened 30 seconds ago. Yes, mister. Davies Ariana murmured her own dreams, feeling like a distant, forgotten language. It was on a particularly brutal Thursday evening, with the rain outside lashing against the panoramic windows, that the door chimed. But the person who entered wasn't a sleek financier or a socialite draped in Chanel. It was an old man. He was a ghost from a different world. His coat, a thin, threadbare tweed, was soaked through, clinging to his skeletal frame. His face was a roadmap of hardship, his white hair plastered to his scalp by the rain. He clutched a worn wooden cane, his knuckles white, and his eyes a startlingly clear blue, darted around the opulent room with a mixture of confusion and desperation. He looked lost, cold, and utterly out of place. A hush fell over the nearest tables. A woman in a silk dress subtly pulled her Fendi bag closer. The host, a young man named Julian, froze his practiced smile, faltering. Mr. Davies materialized instantly, his face a mask of controlled fury. Sir Davies began, his voice low and menacing. I believe you've made a mistake. This is a private establishment. The old man flinched but held his ground. I just need to get out of the rain for a moment, he rasped, his voice thin and papery. Perhaps just a glass of water. "We don't serve just water to vagrants," Davies hissed already, motioning for security. "You are disturbing our clientele. Please leave, now." Ariana watched from across the room, a tray of appetizers heavy in her hands. Her heart constricted. She saw past the ragged coat and the trembling hands. In his pale blue eyes, she saw the same flicker of vulnerability she saw in Leo's after a difficult breathing treatment. It was the look of someone fighting a battle nobody else could see. Every instinct, every rule drilled into her by Davies screamed at her to look away, to get back to work, to let security handle it. Losing this job wasn't an option. It was Leo's lifeline, but then the old man's gaze met hers. For a fleeting second, there was a spark of recognition, a silent plea that transcended the chasm between their worlds. At that moment, he wasn't a problem to be removed. He was a person. As Davies and the security guard began to corner him near the entrance, Ariana did something she knew she would regret. She put down her tray, took a deep breath, and started walking towards them. The space between her station and the restaurant's entrance felt like a mile-long tightrope. Every eye in the room was on her. She could feel Mr. Davies's glare burning into her, a silent promise of retribution. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the symphony of clinking glasses and muted conversations. "This is insane, Ariana," a voice in her head screamed. "Leo's medication, the rent, don't throw it all away for a stranger." But her feet kept moving. She reached the small tense circle by the door, just as the security guard, a burly man named Frank, put a hand on the old man's arm. The old man winced, a flicker of pain crossing his features. "Mr. Davies," Ariana said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Please wait." Davies turned to her, his eyes narrowing to slits. "Hayes, what in God's name do you think you're doing? Get back to your section. This does not concern you." "He's a customer," Ariana stated, looking directly at the old man. "He's come in out of the storm and he's asked for service. It's my job to provide it." A collective gasp rippled through the nearby tables. Julian, the host, looked at her as if she'd just sprouted a second head. Defying Mr. Davies was professional suicide. "He is a vagrant who will drive away our actual customers," Davies retorted, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Look at him. He can't afford a glass of our water, let alone a meal." "Frank, remove him." "No," Ariana said, taking another step forward, positioning herself slightly between the manager and the old man. She turned her most professional, disarming smile on the stranger. "Sir, I apologize for the confusion. We have a table for you. Right this way." The old man looked at her, his blue eyes wide with disbelief. He seemed as stunned as everyone else. Ariana ignored Davies's apoplectic expression and gently guided the man towards the most inconspicuous table in her section, a small two-top near a service entrance, partially obscured by a large potted ficus. It was the lepers' colony of tables, but tonight it was a sanctuary. "I will deal with you in a moment, Hayes," Davies seethed before turning on his heel to smooth things over with the gawking patrons. Ariana pulled out the chair for the old man. His movements were stiff as he sat his wet coat, leaving a dark patch on the plush velvet seat. He placed his gnarled hands on the crisp white tablecloth, looking at them as if they were foreign objects. "Thank you, miss," he said, his voice barely audible. You didn't have to do that." "Everyone deserves a little warmth on a night like this," she replied softly, unfolding a linen napkin and placing it beside him. "My name is Ariana." "Art," he said, offering a weak smile. "Just art." She brought him a glass of still water with a slice of lemon, just as she would for any other guest. He drank it down in 3 long gulps, his throat clicking with thirst. "Can I get you something to eat?" Art? She asked gently. The soup of the day is a creamy tomato bisque. It's very warm. He looked down at his hands, a blush of shame creeping up his wrinkled neck. I'm afraid I don't have any money, miss. Your boss was right. I just wanted a place to sit for a while. Ariana's heart ached. She thought of the $50 in her wallet earmarked for Leo's prescription refill. It was a choice she shouldn't have to make. But looking at Art's defeated posture, she knew she already had. Don't you worry about that, she said, leaning in conspiratorially. Listen, the kitchen just made a mistake on an order for a beef bourguignon. It's a beautiful, slow braised stew. They were just going to throw it out. It would be a shame for it to go to waste. Would you do me the favor of eating it? It was a lie, of course, a transparent one, but it was wrapped in dignity. Art's eyes glistened with unshed tears. He simply nodded, unable to speak. Ariana punched the order into the system, her own employee code flagging it. The cost would come directly out of her tips and likely her next paycheck. When she brought the steaming bowl to his table, the rich aroma of red wine and tender beef filling the air, the look on his face was one of pure, unadulterated gratitude. It was a look that felt more valuable than any tip she'd ever received. He ate slowly, savoring every bite as if it were his first meal in days. Ariana went about her duties, serving the Vanderbilts, refilling wine glasses, and placating impatient diners, all while feeling the searing heat of Mr. Davies's gaze. She knew the reckoning was coming. And when Art had finished his meal and she was clearing his plate, it arrived. My office. Now, Davies commanded from behind her, his voice devoid of all warmth. Ariana's stomach plummeted. She gave Art a reassuring nod before following her manager into the small, sterile office behind the kitchen. The door clicked shut, sealing her fate. The air in Mr. Davies's office was cold and smelled faintly of bleach and disappointment. He sat behind his large mahogany desk, steepling his fingers, his face a thunderous mask. Ariana stood before him, her back straight, her hands clasped behind her to stop them from shaking. Explain yourself, Hayes. He began, his voice dangerously calm. I was providing service to a person who entered the restaurant, sir, she said, keeping her tone respectful but firm. You were undermining my authority, damaging our brand, and costing us money. He snapped his composure, cracking. I have a $200 complaint from Mrs. Vanderbilt at table 7 because she had to look at that filth while she ate her lobster thermidor. And I see a charge for a $48 beef bourguignon on your employee tab. Are you insane? He was hungry and cold, Mr. Davies. This is not a soup kitchen, he roared, slamming his hand on the desk. This is one of the finest dining establishments in the world. Our image is everything. Your Bleeding Heart charity has jeopardized that. This is your final warning. One more misstep, one more toe out of line, and you are gone. Do you understand me? Yes, Mr. Davies. She said the words, tasting like ash. Now get out and clear that table. I want him gone before the dessert rush. Ariana walked out of the office, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. The warning was clear, the threat to her livelihood, to Leo's well-being, was very real. But as she returned to the dining room, a strange sense of resolve settled over her. She had done the right thing. She went to Art's table. He was looking out the window at the rain, which had softened to a gentle drizzle. Is everything all right, my dear? He asked, his voice full of concern. He had seen the confrontation. Everything is fine, she lied with a smile. I hope you enjoyed the meal. It was the best I've had in a very long time, he said, his gaze earnest. You have a kind heart, Ariana. Don't let anyone take that from you. His words, simple and sincere, fortified her more than he could know. To her surprise, Art returned the following Thursday, and the Thursday after that. He became a quiet, unassuming fixture at her little table by the ficus tree. He was always clean, though his clothes remained worn. He never asked for anything but water. And each time Ariana would find a way to bring him a meal. Sometimes it was a mistaken order. Other times a chef's sample she was supposed to taste test. She would pay for it out of her dwindling tips, a secret transaction between her, the kitchen staff who learned to look the other way, and the old man with the kind eyes. They started to talk. She learned that Art had been a builder in his younger years, and that his wife Eleanor had passed away a few years prior. He spoke of her with a reverence that made Ariana's throat tighten. She was the architect of our lives. He told her one evening, his eyes distant. She could see the beauty in things no one else could. She would have loved this place, not for the glamour, but for the light. She always did love the light. Ariana, in turn, found herself opening up to him. She told him about Parsons, about her dream of designing buildings that felt like homes, not just houses. And hesitantly, she told him about Leo. She described his wicked sense of humor, his love for video games, and the constant, terrifying hum of the nebulizer in their small apartment. She spoke of her fear, the crushing weight of the medical bills, and the guilt of never being able to do enough. Art listened. He didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. He just listened. His blue eyes filled with a deep, compassionate understanding that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in a very long time. He became her confidant, their weekly dinners a small island of peace in her turbulent life. The other staff noticed, of course. Some mocked her, calling her Saint Ariana of the soup kitchen. Others, like Maria, a veteran waitress with tired eyes and a kind smile, would occasionally slip her a $20 bill. "For your brother," she'd whisper. "You're a good kid." Mr. Davies watched it all, his disapproval a palpable force. He seemed to be biding his time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Ariana knew she was on thin ice, but the bond she'd formed with Art felt too important to break. He was more than just a charity case. He was her friend. One evening, after a particularly difficult phone call with Leo's doctor about the rising costs of a new medication, Ariana was feeling the strain more than ever. She was distracted, her movements less precise. She accidentally spilled a few drops of red wine while pouring for a notoriously fussy hedge fund manager. Davies was on her in an instant. His public reprimand was sharp and humiliating. As she retreated to the kitchen, her eyes burning with tears, she felt a profound sense of hopelessness. Later, as she served Art his surplus shepherd's pie, he noticed her red-rimmed eyes. "A hard night?" he asked gently. She nodded, unable to trust her voice. He reached across the table and patted her hand with his calloused, trembling one. "The strongest steel is forged in the hottest fire, Ariana," he said softly. "Remember that." The simple touch, the quiet strength in his words was enough to keep her from shattering. But she didn't know that the fire was about to get much, much hotter. The breaking point was coming, and it was going to be far more devastating than a spilled glass of wine. The first Tuesday of December brought with it a biting wind and the city's first flurry of snow. It also brought Mrs. Genevieve Delacroix to the Gilded Spoon. Mrs. Delacroix wasn't just wealthy. She was old New York money, a woman whose opinion could make or break a restaurant's reputation overnight. She was dining with a food critic from the New York Times, and the tension in the air was thick enough to be carved and served as a main course. Mr. Davies was a whirlwind of frantic energy hovering over their table, personally ensuring every detail was flawless. The entire staff was on edge. For Ariana, it was just another night of walking on eggshells. Art arrived at his usual time, shaking snowflakes from his thin coat. He looked paler than usual, the cold seeming to have seeped deep into his bones. Ariana settled him at his table, her heart aching at his visible shiver. She quickly brought him a steaming cup of tea, whispering that it was in the house. "You'll catch your death, Art," she chided gently. "That coat isn't nearly warm enough." He just smiled. "A warm cup of tea and good company are better than any coat, my dear." Their quiet corner was a world away from the high-stakes drama unfolding at Mrs. Delacroix's table. But those worlds were about to collide. As Ariana was delivering the main course, a meticulously plated Dover sole to the critic, Mrs. Delacroix's perfectly manicured hand shot out and gripped her wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her diamond rings digging into Ariana's skin. "Young lady," she said, her voice dripping with disdain as she nodded towards Art's table. "What is that doing in here?" Ariana frozen. "I'm sorry, madam. That derelict," she clarified, her nose wrinkled in disgust. "I have been watching you fawn over him for the past half hour. This is the Gilded Spoon, not a homeless shelter. His presence is utterly ruining my appetite. I come here for an experience, not to be confronted with the city's squalor." The critic paused, his fork hovering in mid-air, his eyes darting between Mrs. Delacroix and the old man. He was taking notes. Mr. Davies, who had been observing from afar, swooped in instantly. His face was ashen. "Mrs. Delacroix, I am so terribly sorry. Please accept my deepest apologies. This is an internal staffing issue that is being dealt with immediately." He shot Ariana a look of pure venom. It wasn't a warning anymore. It was a death sentence. He strode over to Art's table, his posture rigid with fury. Ariana, her heart pounding in her ears, followed a few steps behind, a dreadful premonition washing over her. "You," Davies barked at Art, dispensing with any pretense of civility. "Out. Your little charity session is over. Get out of my restaurant now." Art looked up, his expression more sad than surprised. "Son, there's no need for—" "I am not your son." Davies spat his voice, rising, drawing the attention of the entire dining room. He grabbed the edge of Art's table. "I have tolerated this nonsense for weeks because of her," he snarled, pointing a trembling finger at Ariana. "But it ends tonight. You are a disgrace to this establishment." And with a grunt of exertion, he tipped the table. The crash was deafening. The teacup shattered on the marble floor. The small plate and silverware clattered. Art, caught by surprise, pushed his chair back with a cry, narrowly avoiding the falling table. The entire restaurant fell silent. Diners stared, mouths agape. Ariana rushed forward. "Art, are you okay?" Ignoring her, Davies turned his full unrestrained fury on Ariana. You are finished!" he yelled, his face contorted in a purple rage. "You are fired. You have brought nothing but trouble to my restaurant since you started this pathetic little project. Your sentimentality, your gross insubordination, it ends now. Get your things and get out. You will not work in another high-end restaurant in this city again. I will personally see to it." The words hit her like physical blows. Fired. Blacklisted. The room began to spin. She saw Leo's face, in her mind the stack of unpaid bills on her kitchen counter. It was all over. All because she had shown a little kindness. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and shameful. Frank, the security guard, was already moving towards Art, his expression grim. Mrs. Delacroix watched with a look of cold satisfaction. Ariana felt a hand on her arm. It was Maria, the older waitress. "Come on, honey," she whispered, her own eyes full of pity. "Let's go. It's not worth it." Defeated, humiliated Ariana let Maria lead her away. She cast one last, heartbroken look back at Art, who was being hauled to his feet by the security guard. His blue eyes met hers, and in them she didn't see fear or anger. She saw something else entirely. A profound, simmering disappointment, and something that looked almost like resolve. As they reached the staff entrance, a voice cut through the silent, shocked dining room. It was a voice that was suddenly clear, strong, and filled with an authority that silenced everything else. It was Art's voice. "Stop!" Everyone froze. Frank stopped pulling on his arm. Davies, who had been straightening his tie, turned around with a sneer. "Did you say something?" Davies mocked. "You're in no position to give orders." The old man stood up straighter. He seemed to shed his frailty like a coat, his posture becoming commanding. He brushed a piece of lint from his worn tweed jacket with a steady hand. He looked directly at Davies, and his pale blue eyes were now as sharp and cold as chips of ice. "On the contrary, Mr. Davies," the old man said, his voice resonating with a power that filled the cavernous room. "I'm in the only position that matters." He took a slow, deliberate step forward. "My name is not Art," he announced, his voice unwavering. "It is Arthur Pendleton, and I am the billionaire owner of this restaurant and every other establishment in the Pendleton Hotel Group." A silence so profound fell over the gilded spoon that the gentle hum of the wine refrigerators seemed like a roar. Every diner, every chef peeking through the kitchen doors, every member of the waitstaff stood frozen, their eyes locked on the old man who was no longer just an old man. Mr. Davies's sneer melted from his face, replaced by a wave of slack-jawed disbelief. His face paled, the color draining away until it was the shade of the starched white tablecloths. "Well, what did you say?" He stammered, the sound barely a squeak. Arthur Pendleton took another step forward, his cane clicking decisively on the marble floor. The trembling uncertainty was gone from his movements. In its place was the measured, confident gait of a man accustomed to absolute authority. "I said," he repeated, his voice dangerously level, "that I am Arthur Pendleton. I founded this company 45 years ago with my late wife, Eleanor. I own this building. I own the land it stands on. I own the plates you serve on and the uniform on your back." He gestured around the room with a sweep of his hand. "My wife and I built our first diner with our bare hands. We believed that food was more than just sustenance. It was an act of service, of giving warmth and dignity to others. The gilded part of the name was her idea of a joke. The spoon was the important part, the tool you use to feed people." His gaze, sharp as a shard of glass, landed back on the petrified manager. "I have been coming here to my own restaurant in disguise for the past 2 months. My board of directors told me our profit margins were at an all-time high, that your management was exemplary. But I've been feeling disconnected from what we built. I wanted to see if the soul of this place, Eleanor's soul, was still here." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "I found nothing but a cold, sterile monument to greed and ego, a place where a shivering old man is seen as filth and a customer's complaint is valued more than basic human decency." He then turned his eyes to Mrs. Delacroix. The socialite who moments before had been a queen on her throne now shrank back in her seat, her face a mask of horror. "Genevieve," Arthur said, his tone icy, "your father Henry must be spinning in his grave. He was a good man. He would be ashamed to see the callousness you've displayed tonight. You have my permission to finish your meal. It will be the last you ever have in any of my establishments. You are permanently banned." Mrs. Delacroix opened and closed her mouth like a fish, but no sound came out. The food critic was scribbling furiously in his notepad, his eyes wide. This was a story far bigger than a review of Dover Sole. Finally, Arthur Pendleton's gaze fell upon Ariana. She was still standing by the staff entrance, her hand held by Maria, tears silently streaming down her face. She was in shock, her mind struggling to reconcile the frail, gentle Art she had befriended with the powerful, commanding figure standing before her now. He walked towards her, his expression softening entirely. The hardness left his face, replaced by the familiar warmth she had come to know. And then, he said, his voice now gentle enough for only her to hear, "I found you." He stopped in front of her. "I watched you, Ariana Hayes. I watched you risk your job day after day. You didn't just give me food. You gave me your time. You gave me your compassion. You shared your stories, your fears, and your dreams. In a building of cold marble and gold, you were the only thing that was genuine. You were the only one who remembered what the spoon was for." He looked at Davies, who was now trembling uncontrollably. "Mr. Davies, you spoke of brand and image. You are correct, they are important, which is why your association with the Pendleton Group is hereby terminated. Frank?" He said to the stunned security guard, "Please escort Mr. Davies off the premises. He is to collect his personal belongings from his office and nothing more. Have his final severance papers drawn up by legal in the morning. Make it 1 week's pay for services rendered." Davies looked as though he'd been struck by lightning. "Mr. Pendleton, sir, I didn't know. It was a mistake. A misunderstanding." "The mistake," Arthur said, turning his back on him, "was thinking that a person's worth is determined by the cost of their coat. The only misunderstanding is your own. You failed the test, Richard." As Frank, his face a mixture of shock and grim duty, led the sputtering, defeated manager, away a new and unfamiliar sound began to fill the restaurant. It started at one table, then spread to another. It was applause. Soft at first, then growing louder, the patrons of the Gilded Spoon began to applaud. Not for the billionaire, but for the waitress who stood crying by the door. Arthur Pendleton turned back to Ariana, his clear blue eyes shining. "Now, Miss Hayes," he said with a small smile, "I believe we have some things to discuss, starting with your promotion." Ariana could only stare, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. Promotion, just moments ago, her world had been collapsing. She had been fired, publicly humiliated, and her future, Leo's future, had seemed to vanish into a black hole of despair. I don't understand," she whispered, wiping a tear from her cheek with the back of her hand. Arthur's smile was gentle. "It's quite simple. You've been the heart of this restaurant for weeks, and no one even knew it. It's time we made it official." He looked over her shoulder at the gathered staff who were watching with wide-eyed awe. "Is there somewhere more private we can talk?" Maria, recovering from her own shock, quickly gestured towards Mr. Davies's now vacant office. "In here, Mr. Pendleton. Sir." Arthur nodded and gently guided Ariana into the office, the same room where she had received her final warning just a few weeks earlier. The irony was not lost on her. He closed the door, shutting out the buzz of the dining room, and offered her a seat. He remained standing, looking out the small window into the bustling kitchen for a moment, before turning back to her. "Ariana," he began, his voice losing its corporate edge and regaining the familiar warmth of art. "When I started this experiment, I was a lonely old man. I had lost my wife, my children were scattered across the globe, running their own empires, and I was rattling around in a penthouse overlooking a city I no longer recognized. I was surrounded by wealth, but I was spiritually bankrupt." He sat down in the chair opposite her. "I came here looking for a spark of what Eleanor and I created. I found it in you, Your kindness wasn't a performance. It was genuine, and it was costly. I know what you sacrificed from your own tips to feed me. I saw the toll it took on you. He leaned forward, his expression serious. You told me about your studies at Parsons, about your dream of designing beautiful functional spaces. You told me about your brother Leo. At the mention of Leo's name, Ariana's composure crumbled. A fresh wave of tears came. The new treatment, the bills. I don't know what I'm going to do now. Arthur reached into the inside pocket of his worn tweed coat. He pulled out, not a wallet, but a sleek, modern smartphone. With a few taps of his thumb, he placed a call. "Robert, it's Arthur," he said into the phone. "I'm sending you a file. A patient named Leo Hayes. Yes, cystic fibrosis. I want you to get him an immediate consultation with Dr. Annabelle Sterling at Johns Hopkins. Yes, her team. The best. Money is no object. He is to have access to every trial, every treatment, every specialist. This is a Pendleton priority. Bill everything directly to my personal foundation. I'll expect an update by morning." He hung up and looked at Ariana. "Doctor, Sterling is the leading researcher in the field. Leo will be in the best hands in the world. You will not have to worry about another medical bill for the rest of his life." Ariana stared at him, her breath hitched in her throat. It was too much to process. The weight that had been crushing her for years, a burden so heavy she had forgotten what it felt like to stand without it, was suddenly gone. Lifted in a single 30-second phone call. She began to sob, not from sadness or fear, but from a profound, overwhelming relief that was so intense it was painful. Arthur waited patiently, letting her cry it out. When her sobs subsided, he continued. "That takes care of the most important thing. Now for the second. Your education. It will be funded in full. A master's degree, a doctorate, whatever you wish to pursue. Your only job is to learn and create." He wasn't finished. "And as for your position here, I'm not offering you your waitress job back, and I'm not offering you Davies's old job as general manager. I am offering you a new role created just for you, Director of Hospitality and Brand Integrity for the entire Pendleton Hotel Group North America." Ariana's jaw dropped. "Director? But I don't know anything about that." "You know everything that matters," he countered. "You know how to treat people with dignity. You know that the soul of a business is more important than its profit margin. I don't need another suit who can read a spreadsheet. I have hundreds of those. I need a conscience. I need a heart. Your first task will be to redesign the training program for all our staff, starting right here at the Gilded Spoon. Your second will be to work with our architects, your future colleagues, to redesign the ambience of our lobbies and restaurants to make them more welcoming, more human. To bring the light back in, as you might say." He smiled, a genuine crinkling smile that reached his blue eyes. "The salary will be more than enough to ensure you and your family are comfortable for the rest of your lives. What do you say, Ariana? Will you help an old man find the soul of his company again?" For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Ariana Hayes wasn't thinking about debt or fear or exhaustion. She was thinking about the possibility. She was thinking about Leo breathing easy. She was thinking of sketchbooks, filled not with desperate dreams, but with actual blueprints. She took a deep, shuddering breath, looked the billionaire who had been her friend all along in the eye, and nodded. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Yes, Mr. Pendleton, I will." "Please," he said, his eyes twinkling. "Call me Art." 6 months later, the Gilded Spoon was unrecognizable. Not in its decor, which remained elegant, but in its atmosphere. The chill was gone, replaced by a palpable warmth. Music played softly. The lighting was a little softer, and the staff, now trained under Ariana's new Dignity First program, moved with a relaxed confidence. Ariana Hayes was no longer a waitress. She walked the floor in a sharply tailored but comfortable pantsuit, her sketchbook often tucked under her arm. She knew every staff member by name, from the head chef to the dishwashers. She had implemented a new policy. One table every night, dubbed Eleanor's Table, was reserved. Working with local charities, she ensured that someone truly in need, a struggling veteran, a single mother celebrating a small victory, an elderly person dining alone, could experience an evening of fine dining with absolute dignity, completely free of charge. The waiting list was months long. Mr. Pendleton Art was there most evenings, not in disguise, but sitting at a quiet table reading a book. He looked 10 years younger. He watched Ariana as she moved through the room, effortlessly soothing an anxious customer, sharing a laugh with a waiter, or making a quick sketch of how the light from the window hit a vase of flowers. He saw the soul of his wife's vision, alive and thriving in the young woman he had almost overlooked. Ariana's life had been transformed. Her mother had been able to quit her second job. Leo was responding miraculously to the treatment at Johns Hopkins. His doctors were optimistic for the first time in years. He was breathing easier, and so was she. Her classes at Parsons were no longer a burden, but a joy, her real-world work with the Pendleton Group's architects, informing her designs, and vice versa. One evening, Art called her over to his table. "Look at this," he said, gesturing to the bustling happy room. "This is what Eleanor always wanted. Not a museum of wealth, but a place of respite. A place that feeds the body and the spirit." "We did it, Art," Ariana said, smiling. "No, my dear," he corrected her gently. "You did it. You reminded me that the strongest foundations are not built on marble or steel, but on kindness." Ariana looked around the room at the smiling faces of the guests and the staff at the warm glow of the chandeliers at the man who had changed her life. She realized her own dream had evolved. It was no longer just about designing buildings. It was about building spaces for humanity, for connection, for compassion. She had found her purpose, not in a gilded cage, but in the simple, profound act of offering a spoon to someone in need. And in doing so, she had saved more than just an old man from the cold. She had saved herself and the legacy of a love she had never known. The first few months of Ariana's new life felt like a dream she was afraid to wake from. She moved her mother and Leo into a spacious, light-filled apartment on the Upper West Side, with a terrace garden her mother had always wanted, and a dedicated state-of-the-art air filtration system for Leo. His progress under Dr. Sterling's care was nothing short of miraculous. For the first time, the constant shadow of fear that had loomed over her family began to recede. At work, Ariana poured her heart into transforming the gilded spoon. It became her laboratory for compassion. Employee morale soared, and surprisingly so did profits. The positive buzz generated by Eleanor's Table drew in a new, younger clientele, people who were drawn to the story and the authenticity as much as the Michelin-starred food. The restaurant felt alive. Art was delighted. He saw her success as a vindication of his belief in her and his wife's founding principles. The next logical step in his mind was to take Ariana's model and apply it across the entire Pendleton Hotel Group. This meant presenting her vision to the board of directors. And that was when the dream began to fray at the edges. The boardroom was on the 80th floor of the Pendleton Tower, a glass-walled cage in the sky that looked down on the rest of Manhattan. It was a world of polished chrome, black leather, and cold, hard numbers. The board members were men and women who had fought their way to the top of the corporate ladder, people for whom sentiment was a synonym for weakness. Ariana, in her most professional navy blue suit, felt like a child playing dress-up. As she set up her laptop, she could feel their eyes on her, their gazes dissecting her, questioning her very presence. They all knew her story. The press had had a field day with the waitress who inherited a kingdom, and she could sense their skepticism. Arthur, sitting at the head of the table, gave her a reassuring nod, but his presence couldn't shield her from the man sitting directly opposite him, Mark Thorne, the chief financial officer. Thorne was everything Mr. Davies had been, but amplified by a factor of 1,000. He was sharp, impeccably dressed, armed with an Ivy League MBA, and possessed eyes that seemed to calculate profit and loss with every blink. He saw Ariana not as an asset, but as Arthur Pendleton's sentimental, multi-million-dollar folly. "As you all know," Arthur began, his voice echoing in the sterile room, "Ariana Hayes has revolutionized our flagship restaurant. I have asked her here today to present her proposal for rolling out the Dignity First and Eleanor's Table initiatives across all 54 of our North American properties." Ariana took a deep breath and began. She spoke of human connection, of brand integrity, of building a legacy. She showed them photos of the transformed gilded spoon, of the smiling staff, of the heartfelt thank you notes from guests of Eleanor's Table. When she finished, there was a polite but cool silence. Then Mark Thorne spoke. "Thank you, Miss Hayes, for that passionate presentation," he said, his voice smooth as silk but laced with condescension. "I've taken the liberty of running some preliminary financial models on this proposal." He clicked a button, and the large screen behind Ariana, which had been showing images of happy people, was suddenly filled with stark, brutal spreadsheets. Red numbers bled across the screen. The Dignity First initiative, with its increased staff training hours, higher wages for non-tipped employees, and expanded benefits, represents an initial operational cost increase of 17%. Thorne stated, his voice clinical. The Eleanor's Table initiative, when scaled across 54 properties, 365 days a year, projects a direct annual revenue loss of approximately $9.8 million. That's before we factor in the potential brand dilution of positioning our luxury establishments as charitable destinations. He turned his gaze on Ariana. "Ms. Hayes, you have a background in design and hospitality service. What is your response to the fiscal reality of your proposal? How do you justify a $10 million expenditure on what is, forgive me, essentially a marketing campaign built on feelings?" The question was a direct attack, designed to expose her inexperience. The room was silent. Every eye was on her. All the confidence she had built over the past 6 months evaporated. She was no longer Ariana Hayes, director of hospitality. She was the waitress caught in the headlights, being asked a question she didn't know how to answer in their language. I believe in long-term value. It's about the people." She stammered her words, feeling flimsy and inadequate against his wall of data. "It builds loyalty, a better work environment." Thorne offered a pitying smile. "Feelings are not a quantifiable asset, Miss Hayes. Loyalty doesn't appear on a quarterly earnings report," Arthur interjected, defending her, but the damage was done. Thorne had successfully framed her as a naive idealist, and himself as the guardian of fiscal responsibility. The rest of the meeting was a blur for Ariana. The board voted to table the discussion pending a more rigorous financial impact assessment, a polite corporate term for a slow death. As Ariana packed up her laptop, her hands shaking, she felt utterly defeated. She had failed. She had let Art down. As she walked out of the boardroom behind the other executives, she overheard Thorne speaking in a low voice to another board member. Can you believe it? 10 million for a soup kitchen? Arthur's losing his touch. He's letting the waitress run the company. The words struck her with the force of a physical blow. The waitress. After everything, that's all she still was to them. A girl who had gotten lucky. A charity case. The weight of her old life, the one she thought she had left behind, came crashing back down on her heavier than ever before. For 2 days, Ariana was a ghost. She went to her beautiful office with its panoramic view of Central Park, but she couldn't work. The spreadsheets and reports on her desk seemed to mock her. The confidence and purpose that had propelled her for months had been replaced by the cold, gnawing voice of imposter syndrome. Thorne was right, it whispered. You don't belong here. You're just a waitress pretending. She avoided Arthur's calls, ashamed to face him. She felt like a fraud. He had invested his faith in an investment that was yielding no returns. On the 3rd day, she was sitting at her large, empty desk, sketching aimlessly in her old notebook, a crumbling fire escape, a cracked city pavement images from her past, when a soft knock came at her door. It was Art. He entered without waiting for an answer, closing the door quietly behind him. He didn't look angry or disappointed. His blue eyes were filled with a familiar, gentle understanding. Hard fall? He asked softly. Ariana couldn't meet his gaze. She just nodded, staring at the lines on her page. I failed Art. They're right. I don't know what I'm doing. I should be serving them coffee, not pitching them $10 million ideas. Arthur pulled up a chair and sat beside her, not across from her. He looked at her sketchbook. Eleanor's first pitch to a board of investors was for this company. He began his voice, a low, steady murmur. We were young. We had nothing but a dream. She stood in front of a dozen men in grey suits, much like the ones you faced. They asked her for profit projections for market analysis. They tore her business plan to shreds. He paused. Do you know what she did? She threw her papers on the floor. She told them they were asking the wrong questions. She said, You're trying to build a business. I'm trying to build a legacy. A business makes money. A legacy makes a difference. She told them a story about her grandmother, who believed that feeding someone was the purest form of love. She didn't sell them a company. She sold them a piece of her soul. He looked at Ariana, his gaze intense. They laughed her out of the room. All but one. One old banker saw the vision. He gave us the loan. The others all came knocking a decade later, begging to invest. You didn't fail, Ariana. You just tried to speak their language. You need to teach them how to speak yours. He tapped his finger on her chest. The fire you're feeling now. This is what forges the steel. Don't run from it. Build with it. His words and the story of Eleanor were like a splash of cold water. He was right. She had tried to beat Mark Thorne at his own game. She had let him frame the debate. Her power wasn't in spreadsheets. It was in stories. It was in people. A new fire ignited within her, burning away the doubt. For the next week, Ariana didn't touch a single financial model. Instead, she assembled an arsenal of stories. She created a beautifully designed confidential report filled with testimonials from staff whose lives had been changed by the new work environment. She included a video montage of interviews with the guests from Eleanor's table, a tearful young teacher who could finally afford a honeymoon dinner, a widower celebrating what would have been his 60th anniversary. She gathered data not on revenue loss, but on the 40% reduction in staff turnover at the Gilded Spoon, calculating the immense savings in hiring and training costs. She compiled a dossier of the glowing press and social media mentions, quantifying the brand integrity Thorne had dismissed. She called a follow-up meeting with the board. When she walked in this time, She wasn't a nervous wreck. She was a woman with a mission. "Good morning," she began, her voice clear and steady. "Mr. Thorne was correct at our last meeting. I cannot justify a $10 million feeling. So today I'm not going to. Today I'm going to present you with a $10 million investment." For 20 minutes, she didn't show them a single spreadsheet. She showed them faces. She told them stories. She played them the video. The boardroom, usually a place of sterile debate, was silent, captivated. She ended with the data on employee retention and the valuation of the free, positive press. "This isn't charity," she concluded, her eyes sweeping across their faces and landing on Thorne. "This is the future of the luxury market. Today's consumers don't just buy a product. They buy a story. They invest in companies that have a soul. What I am proposing is not a cost center. It is an investment in our soul. It is the most valuable asset we have." She finished, and the silence that followed was different. It wasn't cold, it was contemplative. An older board member, a woman who had been fiercely skeptical before, slowly began to clap. Then another joined her, and another. Soon the entire room was applauding, not for a waitress, but for a leader. Mark Thorne sat in stunned silence, defeated. He had come armed for a battle of numbers, and she had won with an army of human hearts. The proposal was passed unanimously. Later that evening, Ariana stood with Art in his office, looking down at the sparkling city lights. "Eleanor would have been so proud of you," he said quietly. Ariana watched the endless river of headlights flowing through the city streets below. They were all people with stories, with hopes, with struggles. For the first time, she felt she belonged in that tower, not because she had been given a title, but because she had earned her place. She hadn't just saved her job or launched a program. She had found her own voice and used it to remind an entire corporation that its greatest legacy would not be the gold on its spoons, but the warmth it offered to the people who held them. Ariana's story is a powerful reminder that the person you are when no one is watching is who you truly are. Her single act of compassion, an act that she thought would be her downfall, became the foundation of her entire future. It teaches us that integrity isn't about grand gestures, but about the small, consistent choices we make every day, especially when they're difficult. Arthur Pendleton wasn't just testing his staff. Life, in its own way, was testing Ariana, and she passed with flying colors. What did you think of Ariana's incredible journey? Do you believe that kindness is its own reward, or was Arthur's gift the justice she deserved? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of empathy, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And for more real-life stories that inspire and move, you don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. Thank you for watching.